Ever had to confront someone older than you and stand your ground?
My sister told my parents I was selling myself and substances, is the sentence I keep hearing in my head, the way a bad song gets stuck and refuses to leave, because they believed her without even blinking. They believed her so completely that they told me to pack a bag and get out as if I were some stray they had been feeding out of pity, and I stood there trying to make words that could crawl over the wall she built with that lie, only nothing I said mattered. Because once someone decides what you are, they stop listening and they start moving furniture around you to make the story fit. I asked for 5 minutes to explain. I asked for one simple question to be answered, which was why on earth they would not even check my phone or call my boss or think for 1 second about how none of it lined up with the person they raised. And my dad said this wasn't a debate, and my mom said this was breaking her heart, and my sister, Rachel, stood off to the side with that soft, sorry face she wears when she is getting exactly what she wants, and the whole thing felt like I had been pushed out of my own life, while everyone else kept rearranging the narrative like it was a living room. I never thought I would see the day where I was holding a grocery bag with some toiletries and my work laptop and a stack of mail, and hearing my mom say that I could come back when I was ready to be honest, which is rich when the only person lying was standing right there. And I will admit I felt that desperate itch to beg, to put my pride in a drawer and work my way back into the house by proving goodness like a sales rep chasing a quota, but there was something colder sitting under that panic. That told me begging would just certify the lie and make me their project, so I walked out with that bag and the shoes I had on and I shut the door slow, not because I was trying to make a point, but because even a thin door takes a moment to close on your childhood. I drove around with nowhere to go, which is a special kind of humiliation you do not understand until you have it, and I kept thinking about all the little moments that had led up to this. The times Rachel borrowed money and said not to tell Mom because it would only worry her. The times she asked me to keep her secrets because she was handling it. The way she always found a way to look like the most responsible person in any room where our parents were watching, and the way I let it happen. Because keeping peace felt like the adult thing to do, which, by the way, is one of those lies families sell you when they need a referee who will not call fouls. I found a cheap motel and I sat on the bed and I went through my phone and my emails and I could see in plain text what they would not even try to see, pay stubs and work chats and receipts from late nights at the office and texts from friends who knew where I was. And it hit me that I was doing detective work on a crime I did not commit, which is a familiar sport for women who are told to justify their lives while everyone else gets to just live them. I wish I could tell you I cried myself to sleep and woke up enlightened, but the truth is pettier and maybe uglier, because I stopped being sad and I got mad. Not the kind of mad that throws things, the kind of mad that gets quiet and thoughtful. The kind of mad that starts making lists, and at the very top of that list was one simple line that said, protect yourself, because once someone uses a lie to move you out of your home, they will use anything you leave behind to finish the job. I pulled my credit report and locked it. I changed the passwords that had any overlap with family accounts. I took my name off the streaming services and the shared grocery app where I was, hilariously, still the one paying. And then I looked at the one thing I knew would actually sting, which was the family phone plan that had been in my name since college, because the store said it would help me build credit, and for years I had done the grown-up thing and kept it, paid it, and let them Venmo me whatever they remembered each month, sometimes late, sometimes not at all. I went to the carrier store with my driver's license and the account PIN, and I said I wanted to close the plan today and move my line to a solo plan, and the rep was polite and asked if I was sure, and I said I was past sure. And when he hit the last button, my phone buzzed with a flood of messages. First my mom asking why the phone stopped working, then my dad demanding I fix it right now because they had emergencies, then my sister offering to talk if I turned it back on. Which made me laugh in this small, bitter way that did not feel good but did feel honest. I sent one single text to the family group that said I will no longer fund or manage anything in my name for people who call me a criminal. You can set up your own plan like adults. And then I muted the thread and sat there in the parking lot letting the silence settle. Not triumph, not joy, just that quiet space where you realize you have finally stopped asking the wrong people for permission. I know someone will say that was mean, and maybe it was, but you know what is meaner? Being thrown out without a question and being told to earn your way back by confessing to a lie you did not tell, and I was done playing that game. I was done making it easy for them to believe the worst by still providing the best, and if that sounds cold, remember who locked the door first. I kept the receipt from the carrier folded in my wallet, which might sound silly, but it felt like a small piece of proof that I could make decisions and live with them, and on the drive to a friend's couch, I made a second decision that tasted even better, which was that the next time my parents wanted to speak to me, they would not get me in a kitchen with my bag on the floor and a lecture in the air. They would get me on my terms, on neutral ground, with witnesses if I wanted them, and with facts that did not care about anyone's favorite child. And here is where the night took a turn I did not see coming, because as I plugged my phone in and tried to sleep, a new message lit the screen. Not from my parents, not from Rachel, but from someone who owed her nothing and me even less. Someone who had heard just enough to ask a question that could blow a hole right through her perfect story, and I opened it with a feeling I had not had all day, which was the first spark of leverage. When I think back on those first months after being thrown out, it was not survival in the glamorous sense of pulling myself up by bootstraps or living some bold independent dream. It was survival in the grittiest sense of stretching a paycheck that barely existed, of saying yes to every shift I could get, of eating whatever was cheapest and filling, and of learning that you can live without family dinners, but you cannot live without paying rent on time. I worked jobs that did not even match the degree I had, because when you are scrambling you take what you can get, so I juggled coffee shop mornings, bar shifts at night, and squeezed in a temp office job on weekends when they needed extra hands. And every hour I was exhausted but also determined, because no matter how much I stumbled, there was no way in hell I was going to crawl back and knock on their door. I promised myself I would build something, even if it was crooked and shaky at first, and little by little the pieces started to look like a real life. I found a roommate through a friend of a friend and rented a tiny apartment that was not much, but had a lock that was mine, and I remember sitting on the floor with secondhand furniture thinking, this may be small, but it is not a hand-me-down from anyone who thinks I owe them an apology for breathing. I enrolled in night classes, not because I had some perfect plan, but because I needed to keep moving forward, and I figured if I kept learning, sooner or later it would open a door that nobody could slam in my face. I kept a notebook with goals, not dramatic ones, just simple things like pay off the credit card, save for a car, stop relying on the bus that always broke down. Every check that cleared felt like a personal rebuttal to Rachel's lie, a reminder that I was not the person she painted me to be, and with every small step I started to see the gap grow between the family story they were telling and the actual life I was building. Of course, Rachel made sure to broadcast her version of success all over social media. There she was with our parents at dinners, vacations, celebrations, smiling like she had single-handedly kept the family together while the wild child went rogue. And yes, I will not pretend I was above scrolling through her feed at midnight, comparing my thrift store couch to her hotel selfies, but the thing I noticed as time passed was how staged it all looked. How it felt like she needed an audience for every achievement, while I was starting to realize the power in doing things quietly and letting results speak when the time came. Still, seeing my parents in her photos hurt more than I wanted to admit, because I could not stop the thought that they probably felt proud of her while they still felt disgust toward me. That hurt turned into fuel though, and fuel turned into progress. I landed a steady job at a small marketing firm after finishing those night classes, and for the first time in years I had mornings where I woke up without the dread of how to pay for groceries. I started making friends who did not know me as the sister who messed up, but just as me, and with them I built a version of family that was chosen and safe. They saw me work hard, they saw me be dependable, and they never once hinted that I needed to prove I was not some kind of addict or criminal. It was freeing in a way I had never known. Around that time, the first signs came that Rachel's flawless story had cracks, though not enough to tear it open yet. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that she was bouncing between jobs, that the glamorous posts did not always match the paycheck, and that some of the people who worked with her quietly rolled their eyes when her name came up. My parents, though, did not let that show. They sent me vague messages here and there, emails that said things like, "Hope you're doing well," or "Would be nice to talk when you're ready." I ignored them. It wasn't spite for the sake of spite, it was principle. I decided they did not get to check in on me like I was a former neighbor, not after tossing me aside without a question. If they wanted me back, it was not going to be through lukewarm notes. It was going to require real acknowledgement, real humility, and I did not think they had it in them. By the time I had my own little savings account and a circle of people who cared about me without conditions, I realized I was not living in reaction to Rachel anymore. I was living for myself, and the quiet revenge in that was sharper than anything I could have planned. Every promotion, every bill paid on time, every laugh with friends who chose me, it was all evidence that the lie had not defined me, and that the people who swallowed it were shrinking in relevance with every year that passed. But here is the thing. Life has a way of circling back to unfinished business, and no matter how much I wanted to keep them blocked out, I knew deep down they would eventually try harder to claw their way back in. The question that kept me up some nights was whether I would be ready when they did, because forgiveness is not the same as letting people rewrite history, and I was not sure which direction I would go if that door came knocking. And then, almost as if the universe wanted to test just how much I had grown, the first real crack in Rachel's armor appeared in a way that could not be ignored, and it reached me not through social media or gossip, but through someone I never expected. Someone who had no reason to protect her anymore, and suddenly the control I thought I would never have came closer than I had ever imagined. The message came from Evan, the ex who used to show up to holidays with a polite smile and a bottle of something he could not afford, a guy I never particularly liked, but never had a reason to distrust, and he wrote that he was done being useful to Rachel, that she had burned through every favor and then tried to lay one more mess at my feet, and if I wanted to know exactly how the lie had been born, he was willing to meet and put it on the table without drama, which I believed not because he was noble, but because people who get scorched by the same flame eventually stop caring about who looks bad as long as the fire finally gets named. We sat in a crowded coffee place where I could hear other people's lives humming around us, and he slid his phone across the table with screenshots that were not vague or out of context, but painfully clear. A thread where Rachel bragged about telling our parents I was selling myself because she needed a distraction from a money problem that she had no plan to fix, a thread where she said my parents would eat anything if it let them keep the version of her they liked, and a voice note where she laughed about how convincing she could be when she leaned into tears. And I do not know if there is a word for the moment you see a lie become a fact in real time, but it feels like being shoved back into a memory and finally finding the light switch. I did not cry, because tears would have suggested I was surprised, and somewhere in my bones I was not surprised at all. I was simply done, which is a colder feeling that leaves your hands steady and your brain quiet, so I forwarded the messages to my email. I airdropped them to my laptop, I saved them to a drive that did not live in my home, and then I texted a friend from work who had a cousin in compliance and asked what the cleanest, most boring, least dramatic path looked like if I wanted a paper trail that would hold up in any room where the truth might be challenged, and the answer was simple in a way that made me almost laugh, because sometimes the strongest move is not a speech or a scene, it is a timeline and signatures. I wrote out the facts in plain language, every date I could prove, every payment I had made on that family plan, every email where I had offered help and been ignored, every message that showed where I was on nights she later hinted I was out doing things I never did, and at the bottom I attached Evan's files, and then I walked that packet into a notary who did not care about my story, which is exactly why I wanted her stamp. There is a kind of freedom in realizing you do not need to convince anyone with warmth when you can simply corner them with accuracy, so I sent a certified copy to my parents with a cover note that was not cruel, but was absolutely unyielding. A note that said I would not be meeting in kitchens or on front porches, that if they wanted a conversation they could propose a time with a licensed mediator and bring a written acknowledgement of the harm they had done by believing and repeating a smear. And that until those two things existed we would not speak, and if they wanted to test whether I meant it they could try calling, because I had already changed my number. Then I sent a second packet, this one to Rachel, and I did not bother with the long story or any ice cream words about sisters and bridges. I just printed her own words in black and white and clipped them to a single page that said she had one way to keep me from distributing this to anyone who might be evaluating her character. In the near future, which included, but was not limited to our parents, our extended family who liked to gossip like they were on a payroll, and any employer who might call me for a reference because she once put me down on a form without asking. And that way was to tell the truth herself to the people she had poisoned and to do it in writing, and once it was done I would confirm receipt and we could then discuss what restitution looked like for the money and the reputation she had lit on fire. If that sounds ruthless, understand that I was not interested in a dramatic confrontation where she could cry and throw theatrics at the wall until everyone felt too awkward to hold a line. I wanted arithmetic. I wanted inputs and outputs. I wanted a record that would follow her even if she tried to pretend it never happened, and the most effective revenge I could imagine was to force her to use the one thing she had always avoided, which was accountability that left a trail. She replied with 3 messages in a row that looked like the greatest hits of her playbook. First outrage about how I was threatening her life, then pity about how hard things had been and how nobody helped her, and finally the flattery that I used to swallow like sugar. The one where she says I am the strong one and she knew I could handle it, and in the past I would have softened right there, but this time I wrote back with one line that tasted cleaner than anything I had said to her in years, which was that the deadline for her written confession was in 1 month, that I would not debate the terms, and that silence would be treated as refusal. I dropped the letter in the mail. I set a reminder on my calendar, and then, because revenge only feels finished when you remove the easy exits, I forwarded a copy of my notarized timeline to a locked email thread titled with my own name and the word truth. And I added 2 people I trusted who would hit send on my signal if anything went sideways, which meant that for the first time since she lied, the leverage did not belong to her anymore, and the best part was that I did not have to explode anyone's world to make it work. I just had to close every door she used to slip out of consequences. That night, while my phone buzzed with her late voicemails swinging between rage and pleading, I muted the thread and let the silence do the work, because the next move was hers, and for once she knew it. And the knowledge was already chewing through the pretty mask she wore for everyone else. By the time I met Daniel, I had already made a decision that nobody with my last name was going to run my life again, and on our second long conversation when I told him the short version of the mess, he did not try to fix it with a speech or a toolkit. He just asked what safety and respect would look like in practical terms and whether I was willing to design those rules with the same care I brought to my job. So we sat with coffee and built a checklist that did not leave room for drama. Which meant that if my parents or Rachel ever wanted access to anything important, including a wedding, they would first schedule a session with a neutral mediator. They would sign a simple acknowledgement of the lie and of the damage it caused. They would repay what they had cost me where money was clear and provable, and they would agree to show up like guests rather than judges, and if that sounded cold to anyone who heard it, I reminded myself that warmth without boundaries is just fuel for another fire. When we got engaged, I sent save the dates that were honest without being a spectacle, because I did not want the day built on suspense about whether my family would crash it. So the card to my parents said that we were getting married and that we would be happy to include them if they completed the steps I had already laid out, and it included the mediator's contact information, a deadline that gave them more than a month, and a line that said there would be no exceptions and no last-minute hallway negotiations, and then I set the email to request a read receipt so that nobody could pretend they missed it, and I moved on with planning. I chose the guest list based on who had held me up when things were ugly rather than who would post the best photos. I asked my closest friend to stand where a parent usually stands. And I told the venue that there was a very real chance uninvited family might show up, which meant we needed a check-in desk with a hard list, a password that changed the morning of the event, and a head of security who could read a short script without getting pulled into anyone's feelings. I drafted that script myself because I was done handing power to people who wing it, and it said that any guest not on the list would be directed to a private room, would be offered water and a seat, and would be given a single page stating the conditions for attendance, which included a signed acknowledgement of the lie. a copy of the mediator intake form, and a promise not to create a scene during the ceremony, and if a guest declined to sign, they would be escorted off the property without an audience, while if they signed, the coordinator would text me a photo of the page and I would decide. And yes, that level of control might sound intense, but after the life they tossed me out of like it was trash day, I had earned the right to make sure the next big door they stood near did not swing at their convenience. In the weeks before the wedding, my parents sent a couple of soft messages that did not say much at all, the kind where people try to warm the air without admitting what they froze in the first place, and I replied once with the mediator link and the same conditions. Then set my phone to route unknown calls to voicemail and gave a small wedding-only number to the coordinator in case of true emergencies, because I refused to spend the final week before marrying a man who respected me while juggling fake emergencies from people who once called me a criminal. Daniel and I wrote vows that did not name anyone but made it clear that our home would run on truth and repair rather than performance. We skipped the father-daughter dance entirely and replaced it with a simple thank you moment where I would speak to the people who had housed me, fed me, and kept the lights on when I had none. And I felt a kind of clean relief that had nothing to do with payback and everything to do with order. The deadline for the mediator came and went without any action from my parents or from Rachel, which told me what I already knew, that apology in their world was a last resort rather than a first step, so I finalized seating, paid the last vendor invoices, and told the team to treat any unlisted family as walk UPS who would be handled privately, and then I let myself feel excited without the usual knot because my revenge here was simple and quiet. It was a plan that protected joy without turning the day into a courtroom, and the satisfaction in that was bigger than any door slam. On the morning of the wedding, the coordinator texted to say that two people had walked up early and tried to charm their way past the desk with the kind of confident smiles that have worked on waitlists and host stands for years. And the team guided them to the private room and handed them the one-page form, and there was some raised voice and a lot of offended breathing but no signatures, and they left with that stiff walk people get when their old tricks do not land, and I felt a steadiness I had not known since the night I was told to get out, because the system held and nobody had to yell. I was lining up with my friend who would walk me forward, breathing slow and repeating my vows in my head, when the small wedding-only phone buzzed in the coordinator's hand, and she passed it to me with that look people get when they think a message might break something. And on the screen was a text from my dad that said, "Please let us in, your sister finally confessed," and my heart did that sickening drop and then that hot rise, because after years of silence and half-truths they were trying to drag the center of gravity back to the doorway of my day, and I stood there with the music starting and the room waiting, holding the power they had thrown away, knowing that whatever I said next would decide not just an entrance, but the story we were all going to live with when the music stopped. I looked at the screen, felt that old heat try to climb my throat, and then felt something steadier move in front of it like a guard, because the text was not an emergency, it was a tactic, and tactics only work if you ignore the rules you already set. So I handed the phone back to the coordinator and said to send the reply we had drafted for this exact stunt, the one that said there was a private room by the entrance and a one-page acknowledgement waiting with a notary who did not care about anybody's feelings, and if my sister had truly confessed, then she could put the same words on paper with a date and a signature. My parents could sign a separate line accepting their part in buying and spreading the lie. They could wire the amount they owed me for the years I paid their phone plan and the costs I had to eat when they shoved me out, and after those steps were complete they could enter quietly for the reception only, sit in the back, hug no one unless asked, and leave the moment they felt tempted to make the day about their redemption rather than my marriage. The coordinator slipped away like she had trained for this, and Daniel squeezed my hand without a speech, which was exactly why I was marrying him, and we lined up while the music swelled and I could feel the room's attention like a warm wave waiting to carry me. But the wave held steady because the plan carried me first, and out in the little office where the venue stored extra chairs, a stranger with a seal and a stamp watched my family walk into a real consequence. Later I learned there were first the protests about timing, about dignity, about how family should be handled privately, and the notary, bless her clean indifference, Simply said that she was paid for the next half hour, and if they wanted to use it, they should read and sign, and if they did not, she would pack up and head to her next appointment, and that was the moment the old act ran out of stage. Rachel signed, not with grace, but with that tight little scrawl she uses when she is cornered, and my dad signed the acknowledgement with the kind of shaky flourish people think looks noble, but mostly reads as late, and then came the money, which my mother tried to push to next week until she was told the entry rules were the entry rules, and my dad, who loves the sound of his own authority, muttered something about handling it, opened his banking app, and sent the transfer with the speed of a man who finally understood that words were not the currency here. The coordinator texted me a photo of the signed pages and a screenshot of the transfer hitting the account that I had opened just for restitution, and she followed it with a simple question asking whether the door should open for them. And I let myself stand still for a full breath and asked the only person whose answer mattered, the version of me who had slept on a couch and shut off a family plan and learned how to build walls that did not wobble, and she said that forgiveness and access are different things, and that the cleanest victory would be to protect the ceremony's calm and let the consequences land without an audience. So I texted back that they could attend the reception, and that the team should hand them a printed card explaining the boundaries, which included no photos, no speeches, no seating near my table, and no attempts to corner me in a hallway with tears that had not shown up when they threw me out. I walked forward on my friend's arm and spoke my vows with a steadiness I did not recognize from any other season of my life, because I was not performing bravery, I was living structure. And when we were pronounced married, there was a roar from the people who had fed me and housed me and believed me when it was expensive, and that sound filled the spot my family had once pretended to own. At the reception, I took the microphone just once and kept it short, because joy does not need a sermon, and I thanked the people who held me up. Then said that in honor of a restitution that had finally appeared after years of silence, we were making a donation that night to cover phone plans and emergency transport for women who needed a lifeline when their own families cut them off. And the cheer that rolled back to me was not cruel or petty, it was relief and pride, and watching Daniel's face, while it happened, felt like proof that revenge can be generous without losing its edge. They were there, in the last row where the coordinator had placed them, and they looked smaller than I remembered, not because I wanted them diminished, but because power shrinks when it has to sit quietly and listen. And they stayed quiet because the rules were written and posted and enforced by people who were not impressed by last-minute theater. When the music slowed and the evening softened, my dad tried to step forward with a face that asked for a scene, and security moved first with a polite shake of the head, and I did not have to lift a finger, which was its own kind of healing. Before midnight, I forwarded the signed confession to the mediator so there would be a neutral record. I uploaded the files to the locked thread labeled with my name and the word truth, and I deleted the wedding-only number because it had done its job. And as Daniel and I left the venue, I felt that thin door from years ago finally close behind me in a way that did not hurt, because I was not being pushed out of anything anymore. I was choosing where doors belonged. They had knocked, they had paid, they had spoken the words they avoided for years, and still they did not get to own my day, which was the point all along. And if you want to know whether it felt like too much, I will tell you this without apology. It felt like balance snapping back into place. It felt like the last move in a plan I built when I had nothing but a grocery bag, and it felt, finally, like winning.